Welcome to Windows on the World. Tonight's show is called The Black Magic Temple of Chaos, and we're going to be talking about Freemasonry and its ritual magic and how all of this came about, where it's going, and how it infiltrated pretty much everything. The phrase order out of chaos can actually apply to so much when you think about it. It is said, though, always strive for something, lest you are found idle. Blessed is that servant whom shall be found vigilant. Vigilance is very important. Vigilance gives you the ability to be able to perfect your own mind and put you in contact with the divine source. And we can also say that the robotization of actions does lead to unconscious choices and acceptance. Through conformity or coercion, all is lost. And of course, then slavery of the mind follows. The present has been termed the information age. We hear that a lot, don't we? Information can, of course, mean propaganda and limited choices by repetition of the imposed belief, the narrow corridor of accepted opinion. Yes, information can be propaganda. In fact, information is the wrong word. Let's use wisdom, insight, knowledge, because these words are nowhere to be seen, except in places off the well-worn track, of course. So if we talk of an information age, we must be specific. Information just means whatever is actually fed to you. However, the confusion has spread and there is no need for information. Information which can be directly applied is important. Everything else is secondary. Information overload, that's another thing we hear, isn't it? That term means, in reality, too much distraction. So information can be a weapon of disempowerment. Add to that the unwavering belief in the importance of self, based on nothing of substance, of course. The meaning of information has therefore changed. Misinformation, disinformation, this is more apt. The controllers of the priests used ritual to control the masses, going beyond a productive and workable daily routine. The need for ritual has been surpassed by the need for quick remedies in recent times. These remedies do not work, they were never meant to, that is why they were offered. The need to protest and not to plan. The confusion is actually over a lack of focus, denying oneself access to real knowledge. This comes about through time wasting and, of course, energy harvesting. People's focus is being taken away and put between the two lies, the right and the left. Never has it been worse than it is today. Multiple distractions are on offer. The left and right, the two lies are argued over by all of the media. The descent into nowhere, this confusion has always been catered for. Disciplines introduced by self-appointed priests of knowledge brought about ritual which leads to neurosis. It's very true, that, isn't it? Because we were talking about that in the previous show. The pharaohs of Egypt, the last one in the archive. And that was really about how the pharaohs were themselves controlled and became obsessed with this death cult of ancient Egypt. So the act of deliberately cutting oneself off from direct information is actually what this priestcraft wanted to happen. And we are in the very latest stages of that with the banal propaganda which now passes for all information. But the conjurers of demons and evil spirits of Babylon became the followers of Kabbalah and its symbols. And we're going to be going back to that in this show and into the origins of Freemasonry. Well, of course, all of this symbolism and ritual is a huge waste of time. But we see it in the neo-pagans, even the TikTok witches, the gurus of the New Age cage, the allowed cliches of this Aquarian age. The clueless melting pot of going nowhere, but also creating delusion and, of course, misfortune. Because people who follow this are not connected to the divine source. They are connected to an egregorial source of information, which has been put there to distract them from their own divinity. Well, all this is just called social engineering in modern parlance. A long-term plan. That is all it is. So, the descent into dark magic and delusion was also a plan. On this show, we'll look at the aims of Freemasonry, the force that it was set up to counter, namely the early Christians. And we're going to get into symbolism and demonology and the way that this was actually introduced into the Catholic Church. And we're going to talk about this infiltration of religion during this show also. But the use of grimoires, and one in particular, and the work of John Dee will also be the subject of this show. Well, John Dee aided in promoting what was later the Cabalistic magic of the Languedoc. We'll take a look at the show The Force They Fear in the archive, which featured The Dissipation of the Darkness, a book by G.S. Lawrence published in 1820. And this person who wrote the book was from a long line of Freemasons, a very long line of Freemasons going back 2,000 years. And what's interesting about this book is its credibility and the way that it explains exactly what has happened and what the true purpose of Freemasonry actually is, and of course was. And you can download the book, The Dissipation of the Darkness by G.S. Lawrence, on the free books page at windowsontheworld.net. And we are told in this book of the true purpose of Freemasonry. This is all about infiltration. The origins of the infiltration of the early Christians goes back to 43 AD. According to this prophetic book, well, in reality, known long-term plan, which is revealed in this book, it is understood that the mother of Freemasonry is the ancient mysterious force from the year 43 after Christ until 1717, when Freemasonry was officially unveiled in the British Isles. And of course, it spread to France. The Grand Orient Lodge and the Scottish Rite are inextricably linked. Well, according to the author of The Dissipation of the Darkness, the masonry of our ancestors, this mysterious force, was called the Widowed Mother, in honour of Hiram, who was orphaned of his father Hiram, therefore was called the widow's son. That's what the Freemasons say where they're in trouble. They say, will no one help the widow's son? And of course, we can refer to Samael, the blind god, also known as Lucifer when he was an angel, who is stated in Freemasonic doctrine to have had a child with earthly Eve, and because the child was part divine, part angel, this is where we get the widow's son once more, because Eve was a widow after Samael left, and this is before the time of Adam. This is what these people believe, and you can find that in A Cult That Rules the World at windowsontheworld.net. So after King Herod Agrippa started out this operation to destroy the power they so feared, the author reports in 43 AD that within a few months 2,000 brothers had joined, bearing the title, the Mysterious Ones. Well, we have the overuse of the word mysterious these days, don't we? And of course, it was used and overused by the Cabalists and, of course, the Rosicrucians. But it spread into every corner of the world, and the mother grew monstrously. If it were not for her, their religion would have disappeared. but it did not succeed in its longing to annihilate the Christian religion. It did, however, increase enormously. Later, says the book, oh surprise, it ended in dissensions and disturbances. Disturbances that dragged it to death. It was ready for burial at the beginning of the 17th century, so they say about Freemasonry. Now this is very interesting, because when we put these people who we associate with Freemasonry into positions of power, they often fall out. And that is something which people should take on board. It's a very good way and strategy to actually usurp and interrupt what is going on a bigger level, of course. It was ready for burial, was Freemasonry, at the beginning of the 17th century, but after a time it began to revive slowly. In silence and without pain, a daughter was born, Laicism. This creature felt itself weak and retarded in its growth. It asked its mother to give it a sister to aid it. Then the new Freemasonry was born, thanks to the work of Joseph Levy and John Dee. The two sisters grew, united by a great love. From then, two groups were formed, one Jewish, the other Protestant. The first group, embedded and hiding in plain sight in the Judaic, preserved the principle of the Mother Masonry, which is, of course, to attack all Christianity. The second, the Protestant, specialised in attacking Catholicism. However, it is wise to remember that the imitators and their cult had little power, as they had no truth, just diabolical deception, as they still have today. And the diabolical deception is really out in the open, more than it ever was. Well, apparently they were distraught to find that our enemies increased in numbers and firmness. It seemed as if they, the original mysterious force, did not fear us at all. It was obvious that a hidden force sustained them in spite of our persecution, said those who set up the original Freemasonry. And that is their Achilles heel and always has been. Well, G.S. Lawrence, the author of The Dissipation of the Darkness, states those evil creatures produced worse creatures. Nihilism, Bolshevisms, communism and socialism. And we will see many such examples. May God free us from what will occur. Well, at the moment, we can call it communitarianism. That is the word of which all media will never speak. That is the word of which all media actually ignores and buries. Well, that book was written in the 1800s when the true face of the cult was shown to the public, but the public in the main did not search for this information and therefore, just like today, did not act upon it. A few quotes now. Joseph Lehman, Catholic priest, wrote, "The origin of Freemasonry must be attributed to Judaism. Certainly not to Judaism as a whole, but at least to a perverted Judaism." So here we get the work also of the Cabalists and the Frankists, the Sabbatean Frankists, those who actually converted first to Islam and then to Catholicism. And of course, we now have these revelations of the resignation of the Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby, who was really, we could say, under the thumb of this abuser within the church. So when we talk about infiltration, we're talking about full-on infiltration. Let's have another quote. Freemasonic author Nicholas Saracosa states, "The inventor, founder or introducer of the Masonic system, if he was not a Jew by circumcision, was as much a Jew at heart as the best of the circumcised, for Masonry breathes Judaism through its four sides." The Rabbi Isaac Wise wrote in 1855, "Masonry is a Jewish institution whose history, degrees, assignments, signs and explanations are of a Jewish nature from beginning to end." The Jewish historian Bernard Lazar wrote, "It is evident there were only Jews and Cabalistic Jews in Masonry's origin." And Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism in 1897 in Switzerland, stated, Masonic lodges established all over the world offered to help us achieve our independence. Those pigs, the non-Jewish Masons, will never understand the final object of Masonry. Well, through this cult, much has been achieved and millions duped by those both inside and outside the organisation. And what we're talking about here is a cult which hides within a religion which is now known as Judaism. The Temple of Jerusalem, the original Freemasonic temple, was from 1717 known as a lodge, and that is still the case today. All symbolism and ritual in Freemasonry is a cover, and its real and only aim was to destroy what they called the mysterious force. The power inherent in the followers of the Way, the system of early Christians, and feared by those who despised these disciples of the Way, is what we're talking about here. We're talking about a true spiritual power which these people merely could, only imitate. See our post, The Force They Fear at windowsontheworld.net, with the show of that name, plus the follow-up. And the show's called The Brotherhood of Evil, the follow-up show. Well, the book describing the history and founders of what was the force, called the Mysterious Force, which was in imitation of the power they feared, is described in this book, The Dissipation of the Darkness, and it's well worth a read. However, even after the birth of their diabolical cult, those that usurped the name of the mysterious force stated, whoever opposed the fundamental laws or violates a single word of the oath will die horribly and will be punished by God. So, we're talking here about a kind of reversal of reality, taking of oaths and the blood bonds, which were the original foundation of Freemasonry, were then taken into the rituals of Freemasonry, and after the third degree there isn't really any going back, even though people say you can leave. Well, it's not that easy, because once you are in up to the third degree, you are duty bound to your brotherhood for life, which is why, of course, Freemasonry is anti-Christian. Not just why, one of the reasons that we can see in plain sight. Well, the taking of oaths, of course, was forbidden by the followers of the Way for the very reason that the blood oath is a contract to serve a master, and a diabolical one. Well, June 24th, 1717 was the date when the temple became the lodge, as we have discussed above. So the opening of every lodge meeting is with 3 strikes of the hammer. And these 3 strikes of the hammer signify the 3 nails to crucify Jesus. The initiates have no idea that the single goal of their lodge is the destruction of the force they have feared since before and after their inception in 43 AD. It acts for the demolition of thrones, monarchies of course, the abolition of all authorities, so those behind the curtain may have absolute domination of the world. And of course we can see that in the Young Turks Revolution, we see it in the Russian Revolution, we see it in the French Revolution. Wherever we see the word revolution, we are talking about this cult. And of course it adopted the same emblems as Jesus: liberty, fraternity, equality. But it reverses them in contradiction to the true intentions. Liberty of blasphemies and deceits, egoism and privilege, love of revenge, division and endless conflicts are what we are talking about here. Well, it's a familiar template for the current subversion of the most righteous. Betrayal, aggression, robbery, pride, profanation and nihilism reign amongst themselves. The lies of the cult asserted our association existed before the creation of the terrestrial globe and was spread through the planets and the solar system. The megalomania, of course, and neurotic and constant need to lie cannot get more obvious than that ridiculous statement. Indeed, The ridiculous claims constantly and consistently made by the cult are almost comedic, except for the bitter hate and need for the domination and destruction of everything that is, of course, the source of these absurd lies. So, I'm going to take a very short break, and I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to Windows on the World. So much information I want to put out in these shows, and when I look at the archive, it does really all join together. In fact, people have actually been looking at the website and saying that, which is great because it means that they're getting the whole purpose of it. It's a bit like an encyclopedia that you can dip in and out of. I'd also like to thank everyone who does support the show, and I have started to upload a few of the shows onto YouTube now. We stopped uploading there for quite some time because they took down most of the shows that we'd done during the COVID era. But the stuff that we're putting out now can be accessed there, and I put them up kind of randomly, but there is some sequence to it all. I actually put shows up there that we've recorded over the past year or so, and it's good because it brings in a few more people who can get to look at the information, and they interact in the comments section, which is really good as well. Also, if you do support the show and you were making a contribution through the bank, I closed down the bank that I was using and I've started up another one. So if you were paying into the £5 a month club and you haven't listened to the shows for a while, do send me an email at info@windowsontheworld.net and I'll send you the new details. And of course, if you want to sign up, please do send me an email at info@windowsontheworld.net. You can also support us on the homepage through PayPal and Patreon. And we do support people ourselves. That's the whole point of this, is that there are a few people out there who are in touch and are sending in great information, and it's like a mutual support really, and a mutual trust between the people who listen to the shows, and I think that's very, very good. The people who listen to the Windows on the World shows are a different type of person who would listen to the conspiracy type media shows, because those have really gone into the news cycle, repetition, and not going anywhere. And I found that very depressing, actually. So that's why I wanted to really focus what we were doing here, so it would be an antidote to all of that time wasting and energy harvesting, which is in a way what we're talking about in this show. So to get back to it, the new masonry from 1717 onwards gave birth to socialism and communism, according to G.S. Lawrence in his book The Dissipation of the Darkness, which was actually written in 1820. Each one of these creatures, it says, will form a party, and each party will look out, fortifying the interests of its mother masonry through the present infiltration system. We can see this. Communitarian itself is a product of the same source. The goals of aggravating confusion, the disappearing of civilization, real civilization we mean here, advanced civilization is degenerating, the elimination of religion and the degeneration of education. The evil creatures produced worse creatures, nihilism, Bolshevism, communism and socialism. Whenever their diabolical lodge gatherings are held, they open with those 3 strikes of the hammer, signifying the nails which nailed Jesus to the cross. This is a cult based on irrational hate and jealous rage. Their 3 symbolic stars also signify the nailing of Jesus to the cross. All the gullible and self-serving fools masquerading as a brotherhood will repeat nonsense, such as that their association dates back to the time of Solomon and his temple. However, their cult had little effect, and the followers of their enemy increased, making their irrational but conquering rage also increase. That is according to the book. So in other words, what we're talking about here is a cult that is not that successful. It's successful in infiltration, but it is not successful in a spiritual sense of how it is able to attack those who are believers in the real divinity. That is, of course, why they are, in essence, promoting materialistic atheism, because they have to get rid of this force that they inherently fear. And those that have that force have nothing to fear. That is the real issue that we're talking about here. Well, the founders of their mysterious force were Herod Agrippa, King Herod Agrippa, Hiram Abiud and Moab Levi. And they were distraught to find that the mysterious force of their enemy sustained and protected them from the neurotic and intentionally evil infiltrators, these Masonic imitators. They caused division amongst families, as they still do now, through their, well, let's have a look at what we're talking about: the Gaia cult, climate change, false pandemics. All of this is the work of the deceivers. It had started at the temples. It was born from the Babylonians through the death cult of the Egyptians, Thoth, Isis, Osiris, Horus, another control system, the rituals and rules of the Pharisees, the hiding of the cult within what was later called Judaism through the Kabbalah of the Languedoc, all presented as empowerment and unity, symbolism for stories, but mainly ritual, the daily grind, the need to prepare for half of one's life in order to attain something. We are told quite sensibly that demons will jump in anywhere where there is empty space. In other words, where there is a lack of spiritual strength, demons will get in. Those voices will attack, and with the help of these people who are quite advanced within this magical realm, these demons can be brought into the physical world. And indeed, they are ready to jump in at any moment. And whenever you are feeling as though you are under some kind of spiritual attack, they will be behind it. And this really is about a system. So we're only talking about a system of management here. We're not talking about anything really esoteric or occult. Keep it simple. So the early Christian Gnostics were well aware of all this. It was to cut out the Babylonian conjurers and to stop this force which was emanating, this demiurge, as it was called by the early Christian Gnostics. So then we can get on to Sabaoth, the son of Yaldabaoth, who was given a place in the heavens. Yaldabaoth was the demiurge, his son, a chip off the old block, but later venerated in the Gnostic texts, such as the hypostasis of the archons and on the origin of the world. where Sabaoth overthrows his father Yaldabaoth, and Sabaoth repents and is enthroned. After hearing the voice of Sophia, Sabaoth repents, condemns his parents, and is enthroned in the seventh heaven by Sophia. He is saved despite being Yaldabaoth's son. So according to popular belief, or the available information through the controlled stream of information known as the internet, Sabaoth's salvation implies that genetics do not determine salvation. Some church fathers report that Gnostics identified Sabaoth with Yaldabaoth himself. This is where, of course, the confusion is put in. This is really what they were talking about with the demiurge and the duplicity and the way that this infiltration took place through deception. And Yaldabaoth was also referred to, of course, as the king of chaos. And that's what these people create to bring in their plan. They want chaos, confusion, divide and rule, and the two lies. The public are always placed between lie 1 and lie 2. We see that all the time. And if you don't know what the two lies are, switch on GB News, switch on News Talk, LBC, Sky News, BBC, doesn't matter. They're all the same. They talk about the two lies. Let's get back to this though. In the apocryphal Gospel of Judas, Yaldabaoth is called an angel under the name of Nebro, meaning rebel. So what we're talking about here really is the same as the story and the history of Lucifer, the fallen angel, known in earthly terms and by the Freemasons as Samael, the blind god. But it is easy to get lost in the words of storytellers. So, the fallen angels have a lot to answer for. They have been dealt with, apparently, but are still ready and waiting to grasp hold of any opportunity to deceive and carry on with their chaos. And if we look at this as the fallen angels being the incarnation of demons in this realm, then things make more sense in a historical perspective. Well, the grimoires of the medieval period are in the main Cabalistic and involve the summoning of demons and very detailed and obsessive ritual. So the infiltration of Catholicism by the mysterious force or Freemasonry gave rise to the rituals and summoning of demons within the church. And we're going to talk about one of those now to give you some context. It's called the Grimoire of Honorius. It purports to be Catholic. It was said to be based on the Sworn Book of Honorius, which was an earlier writing in the 1600s. Now, we're not talking about someone called Honorius who wrote it. Those who wrote it were sworn to keep it a secret. They took an oath, just like those who started the mysterious force, also known as Freemasonry, in 43 AD. The Sworn Book of Honorius was printed in the 16th century, and also it is included alongside the Key of Solomon, which is another ritual from, of course, the time of King Solomon himself. The Sworn Book is supposedly, though, the product of a conference of magicians who decided to condense all of their knowledge into one volume. And very interestingly, it masquerades as being rituals to bring you closer to God. In 93 chapters, it covers a large variety of topics, from how to save one's soul from purgatory to catching thieves or finding treasures. It has many instructions on how to conjure and command demons, to work other magical operations, and knowledge of what lies in heaven, among other highly sought after information. It says here, like many grimoires, it has lengthy dissertations for proper operation and seals to be used. Now, what we're talking about here is ritual, the need for ritual. All this came down through the Egyptians, through the Pharisees, and then through Freemasonry and the Black Magicians, the Cabalists. And the need for obsessive ritual is definitely a sign of something which is, in its own essence, pretty neurotic. And of course, amongst these works, we get so many examples of contradictions, of names of power that are spelt differently by different people at different times. The incantations vary, they get mixed up, they sometimes appear to be completely contradictory. This is the messed up world of delusion and chaos, nothing more. Well, the author says, this is the work we're talking about, which is the sworn book of Honorius. This is how it starts. I, Honorius, have laid out the works of Solomon in such a manner in my book. The sworn book features the seal of Solomon and contains rituals. The sworn book of Honorius is a medieval grimoire purportedly written by Honorius of Thebes. Well, actually, that's completely contradicted as well. So this is very similar to the later Rosicrucians and their father RC, this mythical figure who died 100 and odd years before the publication of the Forma Fraternitatis and the Confessio of the Rosicrucians in 1610. So the book, it says, is one of the oldest existing medieval grimoires, as well as one of the most influential. That's the Sworn Book of Honorius, also known as the Grimoire of Honorius, if you want the Catholic version. Interesting, the work was not supportive of pagans or Jews. Purportedly, it was only for Christians, yet it is from so-called Jewish mysticism and very influenced by those who later became known as the Cabalists. So we have this Cabalistic influence from the Languedoc, which went into Spain, came back to Britain through those people of the Enlightenment, the people who worked up to the era of Thomas Paine. We had people like MacGregor Mathers and his book on Kabbalah. We had all these useful idiots that the Kabbalists were influencing to basically destroy their own religion and destroy their own power. So we can see this as an infiltration process, nothing more. This is why those early Christians were trying to fend this stuff off, because it is a spiritual attack. And this book was influenced, as we've said, by the seal of Solomon. And this is where this sigil that we're going to be talking about comes from. Very much like the seal of Solomon. This is where the Catholic Church entered demonology. However, the cover story says the idea was for self-purification, and to know God. The text reveals that the rituals use the same framework for both spiritual and material benefits, using prayers, conjurations, seals, swords, and of course a wand. Circles, magic circles, and names of God, as well as names of angels and demons, are used. The need for preparations and even getting a dream with an angel are necessary to go ahead. So after 3 days of preparation, if you don't get a dream and an angel is not apparent in that dream, then the gig is off, basically. So nothing inspirational, nothing to do with inspiration or insightful is contained in this volume, but lots of rules to be meticulously followed, of course. And it starts with 72 days of purification. The spirits are divided into 4 categories in this book: celestial, or the higher angels; the planetary, or the lower angels; aerial spirits, or demons; and the terrestrial spirits, or demons. The aerial spirits are also listed alongside with the planetary spirits. They are part of the same realm, with the explanation that the planetary angels are used to control them. Well, what could possibly go wrong summoning up any of this stuff? Well, along with all this extreme discipline, the text says, the finest wine may be consumed during the ritual of calling forth the spirits to help calm the nerves. So really, there is no discipline in reality with any of this stuff. It is just a set of rules And it's all contradictory. I've read so many of these texts, and as I said, they spell things wrongly. They're meant to be using the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, which came from the Aramaic, and they're meant to be using these names of God. They can't even agree on the correct spelling of the demons that they're summoning. It's just incredible, this stuff, because the more you read it, the more confusing it gets. It doesn't get any simpler. It just completely does your head in. And this was really how the Cabalists' world operated also. It takes you out of the realm of simplicity and puts you into endless complications which take a lifetime to master, and of course they lead you nowhere. Some people will disagree with that, but when you actually confront them on what they've really learned from it, it's very difficult for them to actually say anything except that it's improved their life in some respect. That's the excuse they used. So, after you've done your 72 days, this is followed by a 20-day purification involving attending Mass and reciting prayers both before and during the service. So you actually have to go to church. So this is the infiltration of Catholicism through the Freemasonry. There is also the need for the involvement of a priest within the rituals in this book of Honorius. And this is followed by 12 days of fasting and prayer. So we've got 72 days followed by 20 days followed by 12 days. For this stage of the operation, a discreet priest is enlisted to help with prayers and services. Now, near the end of the ritual, you prepare a bed surrounded by ashes with divine names written on them, if you can spell them properly, of course. This is the stage for critical sleep visions. Well, if you've been doing this for 90 odd days and you're meant to be having a vision of an angel after the first 3 days, what's it going to be like after 72 days? And if all of this didn't lead to strange and vivid dreams, it would be very surprising, wouldn't it, really? The process for calling the spirits commences, similarly followed by a 4-part ritual, which is called, obviously, the invocation, followed by the seal and the binding, then the conjuration and the placation. Well, what they're talking about by the placation here and the seal and binding is, of course, demons. And placating involves offering these spirits a small gift. Well, I wonder how the demons accept these small gifts. It also states, note, much of the work is performed outside the magic circle, including the excitations. This is, of course, where one gets worked up into a fever pitch reciting these names of power. The obsession with the Kabbalah by the influences of the time and into the 17th and 18th centuries ties all this very nicely, or very demonically, into the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, all influenced by the Illuminists, the Martinists and the Ellis Cohen. Take a look at a show we did called A Cult That Rules the World. Then also look up Kabbalah conmen, and the conmen of Kabbalah. So many links there for you to look at. You can even see the Rosicrucian mystery in inverted commas. Now, the reason I've done these shows is to simplify everything about this cult, this Freemasonic cult. Well, the so-called illumined minds were coerced into the diabolical arts through the Brotherhood. After the infiltration of Kabbalah had compromised the true faith, one of the influential occultists was John Dee. And in 1582, John Dee was one of the leading scientists and occultists of his age. And he undertook a series of mystical experiments at this period. He quickly became convinced that he was communicating with supernatural creatures. One of the first instructions he received was to construct a seal of God based on one already perfected in his books. Now, we're going to be talking now about John Dee and this sigil, which was comparable to the seal of Solomon, And of course, John Dee was the advisor and astrologer to Elizabeth I. And this is where we get the beginnings of Kabbalah and the Freemasonic doctrines of the Order of the Rose Cross infiltrating into the Christian religion, and also the two sides of it, Catholicism and Protestantism. Well, Dee consulted several manuscripts. With his very shrewd eye, he noticed discrepancies and consulted the angels to resolve them. That's what we've been talking about here, the names of power which weren't spelt the same, the discrepancies in these rituals, in how they're meant to be done, because none of these magicians could agree with anything that each other said by the look of what is out there. I mean, we get the acolytes, the followers, who just follow what the magicians said. But when we look at it in objective terms, we see these discrepancies all over the place. Well, this prompted them to reveal an almost totally new version of the Sigillum Dei, the Sigil of Dei, DEI, but with elements from both manuscripts. So what we're talking about here is through John Dee and the Book of Honorius and the infiltration into Catholicism, we get this sigil, the Sigillum Dei Amuth, or the seal of the truth of God, is the most widely known seal after the seal of Solomon. And through the writings and artifacts of John Dee, we find that the sigil actually appears really after the time of John Dee and becomes very, very popular. While the sigil does appear in older texts, of which Dee was probably familiar, he was not happy with them and ultimately claimed guidance from angels in constructing his version. Dee inscribed the sigil on circular wax tablets. He would commune via a medium and what is known as a shew stone, S-H-E-W. He'd communicate through this shew stone with the angels, and the tablets were used in preparing the ritual space for such communication. One tablet was placed upon a table and the shew stone upon the tablet. 4 of the tablets were placed beneath the legs of the table. This is how the magician purportedly protects himself. The main point is, of course, how did Dee know what he was actually communicating with? It's a bit like spiritual mediums. It's a bit like people who are channeling. What are they actually channeling? Well, they actually don't know, because whatever they're channeling could be telling them something completely different to what it actually is. And we've talked about that in our shows with Jerry Marzinski. This is how the voices that people get in their heads operate. They are actually not who they purport to be. So they do not reveal themselves at first, but when they get a hold of the person, then they reveal themselves, start laughing at the person, and then they destroy the person and control them. But of course, John Dee had no idea about all of this, or if he had an idea about it, he didn't talk about it. So the descent of this symbol went into popular culture and brought that down too. So this Sigillum Dei Amuth being used in the show Supernatural. So this show, this TV show Supernatural, actually uses this sigil. So here we get all of this stuff coming into common parlance, as we're saying, witch talk, basically. So once a demon stepped within the confines of the sigil, they became unable to leave. And that's in this show Supernatural. So they're carrying on the confusion of John Dee, but they're doing it on the telly. The design is now very widely known, with examples on coffee mugs and t-shirts available. Yes, I looked. Indeed, you can get t-shirts with it on and coffee mugs. If one looks at this in a practical way of governing, then the messing around with demons and the possession that comes from opening up to being invaded by demonic realms certainly helps create the chaos and confusion, the order out of chaos. Because when people are in chaos, order can be brought in, and that chaos can be used to bring about the order, which is really how the stages of communism actually worked. So we had the infiltration, the degeneration, the crisis, the normalization. All this is order out of chaos, along, of course, with being distracted and disempowered. Well, the problems Dee found, and that are particular to all these ritual-based magic, is that the so-called words of power have different spellings and actually different meanings. The whole area is one big headache for those who are in any way particular. Seals of angels of the type that can be held in the hand during the rituals are mentioned in the instructions in the Honorius Grimoire, but they are never given. And there are 13 topics listed in chapter 2, but never covered in the text. So what were these people on? Were they on something? Were they under the influence of hallucinogenics? Were they just drunk all the time? Well, when we look at the whole thing, it is very degenerate. And of course, the book refers to swords. 7 are needed when calling forth spirits, but not the higher angels. The swords should all be equal in length, and if possible, they should be lustrous or brightly polished. We need a wand of laurel or hazel, and this is needed when calling forth spirits, but not the good angels. And a whistle, we need one of those as well. It is sounded and struck at various points in the ritual to call the spirits. It is not used with the higher angels. Well, they must be telepathic then, I suppose. The process for calling the spirits commences similarly, followed by a 4-part ritual called the invocation, followed by the seal and the binding, then the conjuration and the placation, which is the controlling of the demon or the spirit. Placating involves offering the spirits a small gift, I think, as we've actually already stated. But to obtain your wishes through any angel, the script of Honorius states, to obtain all knowledge, to obtain your wishes through any angel, to know the hour of death, to know all things past, present and future. It goes on and on and on with all these things that can be attained. To know the planets and the stars, to know the virtues of the planets and the stars and their influences, to change the influences of the planets and stars. Who the hell do they think they are, these people? To change day into night and night into day. To know the spirits and the creatures of the air. To know the spirits of the fire, their names, their superiors, their seals, their powers and virtues. Well, they don't even know what they're talking about when they're doing it through their own books. So how could they know everything through this rather flawed ideology? And to know the names and virtues, of course, of the higher spirits. And it says concerning the binding of spirits through words, concerning the binding of spirits through seals, concerning the binding of spirits through tables. There you go, there's John Dee for you. Concerning imposing a form to any spirit. The confinement of spirits, in order that a confined spirit will answer or not. To call forth, wait for it, thunder and lightning. They're getting a bit above themselves here now, aren't they? This is the whole point of these magicians and the megalomania and the delusions that they were under. So basically, they think that they can control the weather. They can make gardens or fortresses disappear or appear. They can make jesters appear. And they can make girls singing psalms appear. It's all very specific, you see. They can make griffins and dragons appear. They can make wild beasts appear, all of them apparently. They can make hunters and dogs appear. They can make someone appear as if they were someone other than where they... Let's see this again. They can make someone appear as if they were somewhere other than where they actually are. Well, these manuscripts were transferred to the Masonic temples or lodges, who of course want to rebuild themselves. Their grand architect Lucifer or earthly messenger Samael is who they worship. Moreover, few people, including most of its members, know that the origin of their local Masonic lodge is 2,000 years old. Indeed, as far as we know, none of the current books on Freemasonry traces Freemasonry to its true origin. That's very true. We've covered that. And in Britain, of course, the Grand Lodge was set up in 1717. But before that, we had the Regis manuscript. I think that was 1390. And that's the oldest Freemasonic document. But everything around this and its cult of demonology has been covered up. And G.S. Lawrence states that ancient masonry was established by King Herod Agrippa to counter the effect of Jesus Christ's ministry. So, just to talk about the author of The Dissipation of the Darkness now, Jonas James Lawrence lived 1775 to 1825. He was the great-grandfather of G.S. Lawrence, who predicted, even before the birth of communist theory, that of Karl Marx in 1848 and the Communist Manifesto, that the new Masonry would give birth to this form of socialism. Not only that, all the corrupt descendant organisations would be the daughters and granddaughters of Mother Masonry. And this is Jonas's own words. Know, my son, that the new Masonry, responding to the demands of the enemy of humanity and fulfilling orders to increase the daughters of corruption, gave birth to socialism. This granddaughter came to be evil, worse than all earlier evils. I predict to you, Samuel, that all these creatures will grow and give birth by satanic spouses to all other creatures of wickedness, corruption and destruction. They will be multiplied and they will scatter their seeds over all the earth, corrupting it, and how poisonous will be their fruits. Each one of those creatures will form a party, and each party will look out for the interests of its mother, aggravating the evils of confusion, civilizations disappearing, eliminating religion, and degenerating education. Well, all of that is currently happening at quite a pace, I think you may have noticed. And then the trumpets of grief and disaster will blow. This prophecy of mine will be fulfilled and will have a great echo. Our descendants will see infernal generations. Men will remember me after my death. They will testify to this opinion of mine, that all the corrupt descendants will be daughters and granddaughters of Mother Masonry. And now we're looking at the rollout of the UN goals through NGOs and favoured corporations. It's the same infiltration programme, but it's in plain sight. So there's no need to have a society with secrets anymore. Everything is out in the open, but the public only see the stated goal. They never suspect the real goals. And if they are confronted with the real goals, they will say, why would they do that? This is the stage we're at, where the two lies rule every conversation. But in conclusion, when looked at as an infiltration plan, all goes hand in hand with the UN, religion, and the neo-pagan cult of Gaia, which is controlling everything through the climate. So maybe, in a metaphorical sense, they really are controlling the weather and are able to deceive people into believing that they are their own worst enemy. They are the creators of their own apocalypse. What could be more diabolical than that? And that is the current global action plan. The common good is collectivized. Control of all through coercion, lies and distractions. Only you can know how to deal with infiltration. Infiltration has been going on for a long, long time, whether in the etheric or the material. The force they fear is the only antidote. The rest is distraction, coercion and manipulation. And that is exactly where we are at the moment. And this show is really a follow-on from the shows that we've done on this subject. And you'll find them all in the archive. Do read The Dissipation of the Darkness by G.S. Lawrence. You can find that on the free books page. Do support the show. Info at Windows on the World if you want to join the £5 a month club, or you want to renew your membership, because I had to close down a previous bank account. And that is something that we are going to have to be very skillful at manoeuvring, this whole financial system, which is the result of what we're talking about here. So until the next show, hope you enjoyed that, and stay in touch through the website.